Anger is one of the most primal emotions in the human experience, and it begins its journey deep within the brain, specifically in a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala functions as the brain's alarm system, constantly scanning the environment for threats and potential dangers. When it detects something that feels threatening, whether physically, emotionally, or socially, it activates a rapid, automatic response designed to protect the individual. This response is part of what scientists call the fight mechanism. In the modern world, the threats we face are rarely life-threatening in the physical sense, but the brain interprets social slights, criticism, or perceived injustices as immediate dangers. Once the amygdala senses a threat, it floods the body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, preparing the body for immediate action. The heart rate increases, blood flow shifts to the muscles, breathing quickens, and the body enters a state of heightened arousal. This is why, when people are angry, they often feel tense, their muscles tighten, their heart pounds, and their thoughts race. The brain is essentially preparing the body to confront or escape the perceived threat, prioritizing speed and survival over rational thought or long-term consequences. While this response was essential for survival in ancestral times, when threats were often physical predators or hostile situations, it can be maladaptive in modern social contexts. Anger triggered by minor slights or stressful situations can cause people to react impulsively, say things they regret, or make decisions that damage relationships and reputations. Importantly, the activation of the amygdala does not just affect behavior, it also influences cognition. When the amygdala takes over, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for reasoning, decision making, planning, and impulse control, becomes less active. This neurological shift explains why people often report feeling out of control when angry, or why logical thinking seems impossible in moments of intense emotion. The brain is essentially prioritizing survival over thought, focusing on immediate reactions rather than considering consequences or alternative solutions. The intensity of the amygdala's response can also vary based on personal history, stress levels, and individual temperament. People with heightened sensitivity or past trauma may experience stronger and more frequent amygdala activations, meaning they can become angry more easily or intensely than others. Understanding that anger is a brain-based phenomenon rather than simply a character flaw is crucial for developing strategies to manage it. It is not that a person is inherently bad or weak when they feel anger. Rather, their brain is responding to a perceived threat in the way it has evolved to do. Recognizing this allows individuals to take a step back, observe their reactions, and implement techniques to calm the nervous system before acting on the emotion. Techniques such as deep breathing, grounding exercises, mindfulness, or even pausing before responding can reduce amygdala activity and give the prefrontal cortex a chance to regain control. In essence, the first step in mastering anger is understanding that it originates as a survival response in the amygdala, designed to protect, but often misfiring in modern life. Awareness of this process empowers individuals to intervene in their own emotional responses, reducing impulsivity, preventing harm, and fostering healthier interactions. The brain is not a static organ. It is highly plastic, meaning it can be trained and strengthened over time. By consistently practicing strategies that calm the amygdala and enhance prefrontal cortex functioning, people can shift their default responses from reactive anger to measured, intentional action. transforming their emotional experiences and relationships. This knowledge reframes anger as a signal, an opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose a more constructive path rather than a force that controls behavior, providing the foundation for emotional regulation, resilience, and personal growth. When anger takes hold, it profoundly affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher order thinking, judgment, planning, empathy, and self-control. The prefrontal cortex acts as the brain's executive, making decisions, evaluating consequences, and regulating emotional impulses. Under normal circumstances, it helps individuals respond thoughtfully to situations, weigh options, and maintain perspective. However, during moments of intense anger, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, essentially shutting down as the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, takes control. This neurological shift explains why people often act impulsively when angry, saying or doing things they later regret. The prefrontal cortex's reduced activity means that rational thinking and long-term consideration are temporarily replaced by survival-driven, instinctual responses. Physiologically, this is a protective mechanism. In ancestral times, when immediate threats could endanger life, rapid responses were more valuable than deliberation. The brain prioritized action over reflection to increase chances of survival. In modern life, however, the consequences of acting on anger are rarely matters of life or death, but the brain responds in the same way as if a predator were present. This disconnect between evolutionary programming and modern challenges can lead to conflicts, damaged relationships, and personal regret. When the prefrontal cortex is offline, the ability to exercise empathy and perspective diminishes. Anger narrows focus, making it difficult to consider other people's feelings, alternative explanations, or the broader context of a situation. This tunnel vision amplifies frustration, resentment, and impulsive behavior as the brain interprets events in black and white terms of threat or injustice. The inability to access rational thought during anger explains why communication often breaks down, decisions feel overwhelming, and emotional reactions escalate quickly. Chronic anger or frequent emotional hijacking can have longer-term consequences on prefrontal cortex functioning. Studies show that repeated exposure to high levels of stress hormones, such as cortisol and adrenaline, can impair neural connections in this region, reducing cognitive flexibility, problem-solving ability, and emotional regulation over time. This highlights why anger management is not just about controlling emotions in the moment, but about protecting and strengthening the brain's executive functions. Strategies to maintain prefrontal cortex activity during anger involve calming the nervous system and consciously redirecting attention. Techniques such as deep breathing, counting, pausing, mindfulness, or engaging in reflective thought help inhibit the amygdala's dominance and allow the prefrontal cortex to regain control. Even brief interventions can prevent the shutdown of higher-order thinking, making it possible to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Additionally, practicing these techniques regularly strengthens neural pathways, enhancing the brain's capacity to remain calm and deliberate during stressful situations. Understanding that anger is a brain state rather than a personal flaw empowers individuals to intervene. The prefrontal cortex can be trained and reinforced through consistent practice, allowing for better decision making, empathy, and emotional regulation in the long term. By acknowledging the physiological underpinnings of anger, people gain insight into their own behavior, recognize triggers, and develop strategies to prevent escalation. The knowledge that the prefrontal cortex's function diminishes during anger transforms anger from an uncontrollable force into a signal, an internal warning that reflection and self-regulation are necessary. This awareness encourages conscious pauses, intentional breathing, and cognitive reframing to maintain executive function. Over time, these practices strengthen the prefrontal cortex's resilience, reducing the likelihood of emotional hijacking and improving overall brain health. In essence, the shutdown of the prefrontal cortex during anger illustrates that emotional responses are not failures of character, but predictable neurological processes. By understanding this dynamic, individuals gain the ability to consciously choose responses, maintain rational thought under stress, and cultivate a mindset of emotional intelligence, ultimately fostering healthier relationships, better decision making, and a calmer, more balanced life. Uncontrolled anger has far-reaching effects on both relationships and emotional health, impacting not only the person experiencing it, but also those around them. When anger is expressed impulsively or frequently, it creates an environment of tension, mistrust, and instability. Emotional outbursts, harsh words, and aggressive behaviors can erode the foundation of even the strongest relationships, leaving partners, family members, friends, and colleagues feeling unsafe or undervalued. People on the receiving end of anger often respond defensively, withdraw emotionally, or mirror the aggression, which escalates conflict and perpetuates a cycle of negativity. Over time, repeated episodes of anger can cause lasting harm, creating emotional scars that are difficult to repair. Beyond the immediate social consequences, chronic anger has a significant impact on the individual's own mental and emotional well-being. Persistent anger keeps the nervous system in a heightened state of arousal, maintaining elevated levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This constant physiological stress can lead to anxiety, irritability, sleep disturbances, and difficulty concentrating. The brain, when exposed to prolonged stress, undergoes structural and functional changes, particularly in areas involved in emotional regulation, such as the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. These changes can reduce cognitive flexibility, impair memory, and weaken the ability to manage future emotional responses effectively. Anger also distorts perception and judgment, amplifying negative thought patterns and creating a feedback loop that reinforces resentment, frustration, and hostility. People may begin to interpret neutral or ambiguous situations as threatening or unfair, further fueling the cycle of anger. The social consequences extend beyond immediate relationships to affect professional interactions, community engagement, and overall quality of life. Anger can lead to conflict at work, isolation from social support networks, and strained family dynamics, creating a sense of chronic tension and dissatisfaction. This persistent state of emotional reactivity can also interfere with problem-solving abilities, reducing the capacity to think clearly and respond constructively to challenges. Importantly, the emotional and physiological effects of anger are interconnected. When a person feels angry, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, is highly active, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment, reasoning, and self-control, is suppressed. This neurological pattern explains why anger often leads to impulsive decisions, aggressive behavior, and communication breakdowns. Understanding this dynamic allows individuals to recognize that anger is not simply a personal flaw or moral weakness, but a predictable brain response that can be managed with intentional strategies. Interventions that promote emotional regulation, such as mindfulness, deep breathing, cognitive reframing, and grounding techniques, help reduce the intensity of anger responses. By calming the nervous system and re-engaging the prefrontal cortex, individuals can respond to challenges with greater clarity, empathy, and self-control. Socially, learning to manage anger improves communication, fosters trust, and strengthens connections with others, creating healthier and more resilient relationships. Emotionally, it reduces the physiological burden of chronic stress, enhances mood stability, and supports overall mental health. Recognizing the impact of anger on the brain and body also empowers individuals to identify triggers, anticipate responses, and implement proactive strategies for maintaining calm. In this sense, anger becomes a signal and opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose a more constructive path rather than a force that dominates behavior. By consistently practicing these techniques, the brain adapts over time, strengthening the neural circuits that support emotional regulation and reducing the intensity and frequency of anger episodes. The cumulative effect of this process is a life characterized by healthier relationships, greater emotional balance, and enhanced resilience, demonstrating that the way anger is managed has profound consequences not only for the individual experiencing it, but also for everyone they interact with, shaping the quality of social and emotional experiences in lasting ways. Calm is not merely the absence of anger, it is a trainable brain state that can be cultivated through deliberate practice and consistent effort. The brain is highly plastic, meaning it has the capacity to change and adapt based on experiences and repeated behaviors. This plasticity allows individuals to strengthen neural circuits that support emotional regulation, self-control, and resilience, effectively teaching the brain to respond with calm rather than react impulsively when confronted with stress or provocation. One of the central components in cultivating calm is the regulation of the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. When the amygdala detects a threat, it triggers a cascade of stress hormones and physiological responses designed for fight or flight situation. While this response was essential for survival in the ancestral environment in modern life, frequent or unnecessary amygdala activation can lead to impulsive reactions, heightened anxiety, and emotional dysregulation. By practicing techniques that calm the nervous system, such as controlled breathing, mindfulness meditation, or progressive muscle relaxation, individuals can reduce the intensity of amygdala activation and maintain greater prefrontal cortex engagement. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions such as reasoning, decision making, planning, and empathy, plays a crucial role in sustaining calm. When this region is active, it allows for thoughtful responses, perspective taking, and deliberate action, even in the face of provocations that might otherwise trigger anger. Calm is therefore not a passive state. It is the active engagement of higher-order brain functions to override automatic emotional impulses. One effective method for building calm is through mindfulness practice, which encourages individuals to observe their thoughts and emotions without judgment. This practice strengthens neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, enhancing the ability to pause and respond rather than react. Even brief moments of mindful awareness can interrupt the automatic escalation of anger, allowing for more measured and constructive behavior. Another powerful approach is deep, intentional breathing, which sends signals to the brain that the body is safe. Slow, controlled breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, counteracting the fight or flight response and promoting physiological calm. This technique not only reduces immediate stress, but also reinforces the brain's capacity to remain regulated in future situations. Cognitive strategies, such as reframing a situation or identifying alternative perspectives, further support the development of calm. By consciously shifting attention away from perceived threats or injustices, individuals can prevent the emotional hijacking that often accompanies anger. Naming emotions, labeling them internally as anger, frustration, or irritation, also creates psychological distance, allowing the prefrontal cortex to maintain control and guide appropriate responses. Over time, repeated practice of these techniques strengthens the brain's capacity for emotional regulation. The more consistently an individual engages in strategies that promote calm, the more the neural circuits supporting self, control, and reflective thinking become dominant. This neuroplastic adaptation reduces the intensity and frequency of anger responses, making calm a default state rather than a rare achievement. Socially, cultivating calm enhances relationships, communication, and empathy. When a person responds with composure rather than reactivity, conflicts are less likely to escalate, trust is reinforced, and connections deepen. Emotionally, calm provides stability, reduces stress-related health risks, and fosters a greater sense of well-being. In professional and personal contexts, calm allows for clearer thinking, better problem solving, and more effective decision making. By understanding that calm is a skill supported by the brain's neuroplasticity, individuals gain empowerment. They recognize that they are not at the mercy of their emotions, but have the ability to shape their responses, strengthen executive functioning, and create a life in which emotional regulation becomes natural, sustainable, and increasingly effortless, enhancing resilience, clarity, and overall quality of life. One of the most powerful and accessible strategies for managing anger is the act of naming the emotion. When a person consciously identifies and labels what they are feeling, such as saying internally, "I am angry," it initiates a shift in brain activity that reduces the intensity of the emotional experience. Neuroscientific studies have shown that labeling emotions engages the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for higher-order thinking, planning, and self-regulation, while simultaneously downregulating activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center. This neurological process transforms anger from an overwhelming force into a more manageable signal that can be observed, understood, and guided rather than acted upon impulsively. Naming the emotion creates psychological distance, allowing individuals to separate their identity from the feeling. It helps them recognize that anger is a temporary state rather than an intrinsic aspect of their character, which reduces self-criticism and enhances emotional clarity. By shifting from automatic reactivity to conscious awareness, the brain can engage reflective thinking and problem solving, which are often impaired during moments of intense anger. The process of labeling emotions is supported by research on affect labeling, which demonstrates that even a simple acknowledgement, such as mentally stating "I feel frustrated" or "I feel angry," can reduce activity in brain regions associated with threat perception and autonomic arousal. This neurological effect provides the individual with an opportunity to pause and choose a response, rather than being swept away by reflexive reactions. In practical terms, naming emotions serves as a signal to implement other calming strategies. Once the brain recognizes that anger is present, techniques such as deep breathing, mindfulness, or cognitive reframing can be applied more effectively because the prefrontal cortex is actively engaged and capable of guiding thoughtful action. Over time, regularly practicing the act of labeling emotions strengthens neural pathways associated with self-regulation, making it increasingly likely that a person will respond with composure rather than impulsivity in challenging situations. Additionally, naming emotions has social benefits as it enhances communication and empathy. When individuals are able to articulate their feelings internally and externally, they are better equipped to explain their perspective without aggression, creating space for understanding and resolution rather than conflict. For example, expressing, "I feel frustrated because I was interrupted," communicates the emotion clearly without blaming others, which reduces defensiveness and promotes constructive dialogue. The act of naming also fosters emotional intelligence by increasing awareness of subtle emotional cues that might otherwise go unnoticed. People who regularly practice affect labeling develop a more nuanced understanding of their emotional landscape, allowing them to detect early signs of anger, irritation, or resentment before they escalate into full-blown reactions. This early detection is critical because anger tends to build momentum rapidly. Intervening at the initial stage provides the best opportunity to maintain control and respond thoughtfully. Importantly, labeling emotions is not a sign of weakness or passivity. It is a deliberate, conscious strategy that leverages the brain's natural architecture to regain control over impulses. It represents an act of neurological empowerment, teaching the brain to respond rather than react, and signaling that the individual has the capacity to manage intense emotional experiences. By consistently practicing this approach, individuals cultivate a habit of self-awareness and reflective thinking, creating a feedback loop in which recognizing and naming emotions leads to calmer responses, improved relationships, and greater emotional resilience. Over time, the integration of affect labeling into daily life strengthens the prefrontal cortex, reduces the frequency and intensity of amygdala hijacks, and promotes overall psychological well-being, demonstrating that a simple act as naming an emotion has profound effects on the brain's ability to regulate anger and maintain composure in the face of challenges. Every time an individual chooses calm over reaction, they are actively rewiring their brain, shaping the way neural circuits function, and creating lasting changes in emotional regulation. The human brain is highly plastic, which means it can adapt and reorganize itself based on repeated behaviors and experiences. When a person practices pausing instead of reacting impulsively, taking deep breaths to counter stress, or reflecting before responding, they strengthen the neural pathways associated with the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, decision making, and emotional control. At the same time, these practices help modulate activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, reducing its tendency to hijack behavior in moments of perceived threat or provocation. This deliberate engagement of calm is essentially training the brain to operate differently under stress. Over time, as these strategies are applied consistently, the brain develops a new default mode of response. Instead of automatically reacting with anger or impulsivity, the individual becomes capable of measured, intentional responses. This is not merely a theoretical concept. Neuroscience demonstrates that repeated practice of emotional regulation techniques such as mindfulness, meditation, and controlled breathing leads to structural and functional changes in the brain. Neural pathways that support calm and reflective thinking become more robust, while circuits associated with reactive anger weaken in relative influence. Each moment in which a person interrupts the automatic cycle of anger reinforces these pathways, making it increasingly likely that calm will emerge as the primary response in future challenging situations, choosing calm also has profound physiological benefits. By preventing the full activation of the fight response, the body experiences lower levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which protects the heart, reduces inflammation, and improves overall health. The nervous system learns that the situation is manageable, which gradually reduces hypersensitivity to stress and enhances resilience. Socially, cultivating calm transforms interactions and relationships. When a person responds thoughtfully rather than reactively, conflicts are less likely to escalate, communication becomes clearer, and empathy and understanding are preserved. Friends, family, colleagues, and partners experience a sense of safety and trust, creating an environment in which cooperation, problem solving, and connection can flourish. The act of choosing calm is also empowering on a personal level. It demonstrates mastery over one's own emotional state, reinforcing the belief that feelings do not have to dictate actions. This sense of control strengthens self-esteem and fosters confidence in one's ability to handle life's challenges without being overwhelmed by negative emotions. Importantly, the process of rewiring the brain through calm is cumulative. Each intentional pause, each mindful breath, and each reflective response adds to the neural foundation, supporting emotional regulation. As the brain adapts, these practices require less conscious effort, and calm becomes increasingly automatic. The individual develops a capacity to maintain clarity, perspective, and composure even under pressure, effectively shifting from reactive patterns to proactive responses. Furthermore, this transformation has cascading effects on other areas of life. Decision-making improves, problem-solving becomes more effective, creativity is enhanced, and overall mental well-being is strengthened. By rewiring the brain through repeated practice of calm, individuals cultivate resilience, reduce vulnerability to stress, and create a life characterized by thoughtful responses rather than impulsive reactions. This deliberate cultivation of calm represents a profound neurological and psychological shift, demonstrating that emotional mastery is not a trait one is born with but a skill that can be developed. Each moment of choosing calm strengthens the brain's capacity to regulate emotion, improves physical health, enhances relationships, and fosters a sense of inner stability, resilience, and empowerment, illustrating that consistent practice in maintaining composure transforms both the structure and function of the brain, ultimately creating a foundation for a more balanced, mindful, and fulfilling life.